Just real quick, Jim, how's the lighting and the setting and all that stuff? Good, okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll go ahead. What we'll do is we'll pick up where we left off from last time. We're in Romans chapter 13. We'll just reread the first 3 verses and go into verse 4. We're seeing here Paul goes into Romans 13. We did this last week. We saw, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. And here we are now this week. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So we were going through last time. We were seeing that God does set up structure. God does set up order. God does set up thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers as the structure for which order should flow through. God doesn't set up who's going to take over these things in the places where we live today. So God does set up, an environment where order should take place, where government and structure and order all should not only take place, but as we were seeing through previous verses, we saw in verse 1, the powers that be are ordained of God. So we see that. There's our structure, there's our order. And that if you resist the power, you're resisting the ordinance of God, this concept of structure. And then he says the rulers are not a terror to good works. We saw that the opposite was true, wasn't going to be a good ruler. But God doesn't pick the candidates. God doesn't pick who's going to be the ruler of a nation or whatever it may be in the dispensation of grace. And where we are today, God's not picking who's going to rule a specific area, nation, city, town, government, whatever it is. But the concept of the fact that order and structure should be in place, that's what God has set up. There should be order, there should be structure, and we all should be subject to the fact that order and structure is the right thing. And so the candidates aren't picked. If they choose to disobey these facts, and set up a corrupt government and set up everything else, then we have something wrong going on here. That's immediate red flag and everything else. We did that last week. But now we're seeing here that we had gone to when we did verse 3 last week, rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Sometimes they're not. And that's when you know they're going off course. It says, after that he says, wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. Well, sometimes you do good and you don't get praise of the same. Sometimes the people who are doing bad get praise of the same. And that's when you know something's not right. You're seeing, the schematic for how good government, good power, good order, good structure should be. And I say should be because it's not always so in the present evil world, in the sin-cursed world. So we're seeing that here. But he says here in verse 4, this is where we are now. He says, for he is the minister of God to thee for good. So this is a description of the ruler of the nation you're in, of the land you're in. He is supposed to be the minister of God to thee for good. So whoever your ruler, president, whatever, he's supposed to be, according to the Bible, verse 4, he's supposed to be the minister of God to thee for good. So I hear everyone laughing now because we know but that's where they're supposed to be. We discern where we are as far as what's going on, but that's how it's supposed to be. God didn't pick the candidate. God did set up the structure for how it's supposed to be. So we see that in verse 4. And so as it goes on to this, the he part is the ruler from Romans 13, verse 3. And so as it goes on, it says, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he, again, that ruler in verse 3, beareth not the sword in vain. He goes on and mentions this here. And he says, for he is the minister of God and a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So we're seeing this mentioned here. But we'll look at some examples in the Proverbs. We're going to get some spiritual lessons, some spiritual ideas out of the book of Proverbs, talking about rulers and how they operate and how they possibly think. We'll look at Proverbs 16, verse 14. Because what you're seeing here, you're seeing the Pauline pattern, what God has set up in the dispensation of grace. You can see how if they're not obeying this pattern, the ruler of your area, land or nation or otherwise, you're seeing that they've gone way off course. But in Proverbs, let me get there myself, Proverbs chapter 16, was it verse 14, goes on to read that the wrath of a king is as messengers of death, but a wise man will pacify it. It says the next one, in the light of the king's countenance is life, and his favor is as a cloud of the latter rain. So you see there in the first part, in verse 14, saying the wrath of a king is as the messengers of death. So it talks about how, the wrath of a king. You don't want to build up the wrath of a king. In this case, as we take the lesson out of it, the wrath of a ruler, you don't want that. And a wise man can pacify wrath. You see that there. And he's saying in the light of the king's countenance is life. So again, taking the concept of a ruler, there's life in the countenance of a ruler, and in his favor is cloud of a lot of rain. You see that there. And if we stay in Proverbs, look at Proverbs 20, verse 2. There's more talking about this. And it says that the fear of a king is as the roaring of a lion. Whoso provoketh him to anger sinneth against his own soul. And so we see that there's no desire we shouldn't go about. If you can take something from this, don't go about looking to get the ruler angry. Don't get the king angry. Don't get the individual, the ruler angry, the leader angry. If we look at Proverbs 20, staying in there, going to verse 8, it says, a king that sitteth in the throne of judgment scattereth away all evil with his eyes. And so, seeing this is a task or something that, as whatever the ruler decides or says is evil, according to them, according to him, according to her, will scatter away all evil with his eyes. He'll do so to make rules or laws or whatever he'll do. And we'll see that there. And then in Proverbs 20, verse 26, it says, a wise king scattereth the wicked and bringeth the wheel over them. And so it just goes on mentioning, as you see that in Proverbs, it's mentioning about the king, what he does, his wrath, his countenance, things like that. So you see ideas and concepts about a ruler, in this case a king over Israel, king over, good king. And the book of Kings, First Kings, Second Kings, talks about the history of Israel with good kings and bad kings, how they ruled, ungodly ones and godly ones. And you see their outcomes and their personalities and how they did what they did. But going back to Romans chapter 13 and verse 4, we're seeing that he, that ruler, is the minister of God to thee for good, and so they should be. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, supposed to be, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So we see that he's supposed to be a revenger of God. He's the revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. And so, for example, we'll see an Old Testament example here. This is something, probably everyone's heard this one before. But we're going to see where Moses is the one who is the ruler of his area. It's an Old Testament one. If we go to Numbers chapter 15, verse 32, it's only 4 verses, but in Numbers chapter 15, verse 32, there's going to be a situation where he is the ruler of the camp there. He has to handle a situation, because what we're finding out is that he doesn't bear the sword in vain. He's got a sword there for a reason. He can go about doing what he needs to do. For a reason. He can execute wrath upon him that does evil. So we'll see that in Numbers chapter 15, verse 32. Moses, he's got the ability to execute wrath upon them that do evil. And of course, when we read it, you're going to be shocked at what the evil is, because things are different in Old Testament times, especially Israel in the wilderness. In Numbers chapter 15, verse 32 says, and while the children of Israel, so we know it's not talking about us, were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. So you think nothing about it. You think, there's a guy picking up sticks. But remember, one of the commandments, especially the 10 commandments, there's actually 613 of them, but this is one of the big deals here, is that you don't work on the Sabbath day. You rest. But this guy's picking up sticks, so he broke the law. So it's up to Moses to execute wrath upon them that doeth evil. This is a lawbreaker. This guy. You think you got lawbreakers out here in your land? This guy's picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. He's a stick picker upper. He's a bad guy. So we see that here in verse, and that's what the law does. It brings out your sin. It says here in verse 32, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and unto all the congregation. And they put him in ward, they put him in jail. And because it was not declared what should be done to him. And the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died, as the Lord commanded Moses. So you're seeing there, this is something where this individual thought that for whatever he went forth and broke one of the 613 points of law. He just went out and picked up some sticks on the wrong day of the week, and it cost him his life. And so Moses, he was the man on the scene who's to be, as we go back to Romans chapter 14, verse 4, he's the minister of God to thee, being in this case where we're looking at Numbers, the book of Numbers. He's handling Israel's group. He's the minister of God at that time. And so we're seeing that if someone does evil, Moses has the sword, and he's not going to bear it in vain. He's going to use it if he has to. They pray to God. God tells them, hey, that guy's guilty. Stone him. And so it says in this case, he's a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Of course, evil is not today picking up stones. We know, or picking up sticks. We know that. But it all has to do with different things, different dispensations, number one, different audience, different time, different everything. But we see there that just as we can learn from Old Testament times, we can take a spiritual application, spiritual lesson, spiritual understanding from the book of Numbers in verse 15 and say, that's an Old Testament example, and we're learning from that. We see how Moses was the one who was the minister of God, to revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So it should be today, not whether it's unto death. It depends on what the issue is, but they should be a minister of God, nonetheless, doing what God is doing today, being ambassadors on the scene. And whether you can call a political individual an ambassador, it remains up to the individual. So the political individual. So we see that in verse 4, that this is where Paul is going with this as he continues to the Romans. And then he says, wherefore, in verse 5, wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For as he says this in verse 5, he's saying it's not only for the concept of wrath that you should be subject to these rulers in your nation and in your city and in your town and in your job and wherever it may be, the structure that God has set up. It's not only for the concept of wrath that you need to listen to whoever's there or you discern and wisely obey, as in pay attention to what they're saying, what they're doing, and accordingly watch for what they say or do. But he's also saying, do it for conscience sake. Do it for your own conscience. And of course, your conscience is what a person believes is right or wrong. Judges to be right or wrong. So do it for your own conscience. When you have a ruler and a leader of a nation, whatever, you do it not just to avoid the wrath, but do it for your own conscience. You can sleep well at night, according to who the ruler is. So we see that in verse 5 that this comes up. If we look at Titus chapter 3, verse 1, we looked at this a little bit last week. But in Titus chapter 3, verse 1, as Titus is going out through the island of Crete, Paul writes to him this letter. Tells him the same thing. We looked at this last week. He tells them the same thing. He tells them, as he's writing to the Cretans, or as he's having Titus go out to the Cretans, he says, put them in mind to be subject to principalities, to powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness unto all men. Then he goes on, explaining more about who they once were. But we see that there. And so we're seeing, their conscience is not to be a blind conscience. They're not to follow blindly, but they're also to pay clear attention to what's going on as they obey. Pay absolute attention and know what they're doing, walking wisely in whatever agendas are out there. And so we see that through here. And then we look at, say, for example, say Acts 23 in verse 1. When he talks about, do this for conscience sake, Acts 23, verse 1. Paul talks about how he's done all that he's done it in good conscience. So he knows that his conscience is clear when he's acted and operated and moved and done what he's had to do. He says that in Acts 23, verse 1, it says, and Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. And so we see that. And of course, you get the result of him saying this. You see that in verse 2. He said, and the high priest Ananias commended them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. And so that's what he gets for living in good conscience. But that's the present world he lived in, and one we're still living in now. But if we look also in Acts 24, verse 16, Paul mentions, the fact that he lives in good conscience again. In Acts 24, verse 16, he says, and herein do I exercise myself, to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. So as Paul lives and breathes and operates and does what he does, he looks to do it having a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. He's not looking to create enemies. He's not looking to create strife, or it happens anyway. But he's not looking to do that himself. He's looking to be pure towards God as much as possible and towards men. He's going to speak the truth, and he's going to speak the truth in love, and he's going to get the gospel out, and he's going to make all men see what is the fellowship of the mystery. And as he does so, he's looking to do so being void of offense toward God and toward men as much as he can. And he's going to do that to where he has, a conscience that's void of offense. So as we see that, when we come back to Romans chapter 13, we're seeing this here in verse 5, where he says, wherefore ye must need be subject, not only for wrath, not only so you don't get stoned, Old Testament example there, but stoned for disobeying your laws there, but also for conscience sake. You want to have a good conscience when you obey the laws that are presented before you, so that you don't have to be worried when you go to sleep at night. You don't have to be worried when you go out to do what you need to do. You're obeying what's been given by the ruler, and you're not looking out. You're not worried about wrath. You're not worried about you and your own conscience. You're living your life, and you're living it according to what the rules are presented in the land you're living in. So he says that there in verse 5. And then he goes on, even in verse 6, he says, for this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. And so as he continues on, he says this. In verse 6, he says, for this cause pay ye tribute also. And so he's going to go on and mention this as well. And he's talking about the cause that he was talking about in verse 4 and verse 5. And he says, for this cause pay ye tribute also. So the tribute, some synonyms that go with the word tribute are taxes or tariffs or payments. So he's saying, essentially pay your taxes. Whatever the taxes are, pay them. Don't try to avoid them. Don't try to say, well, I'm more spiritual now, so I don't have to pay taxes. I'm try to weasel the way out of it. Don't try to work your way out of it. Pay them. Pay whatever it says here. For this cause pay ye tribute also. Not only do you want to do it for your conscience sake, not only to avoid wrath, but go ahead and pay the taxes that are necessary for property, for whatever it is. Just pay them. It's a part of being, alive currently on this planet. Death and taxes, Benjamin Franklin said. It's just a part of what we do. Just pay them. Pay. For this cause, pay ye tribute also, for they, that's supposed to be the ruler from Romans 13:3, whoever it is, are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. And we can even see how the Lord dealt with the rulers at the time, in his time. So we're going to go back and look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And you've probably read all this before, because we've all been in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John previously to where we are now, those red letters. But in Matthew chapter 17, verse 24, Matthew chapter 17, verse 24. Again, we're going here just to look at it, just to see some good spiritual lesson from this Old Testament book. And that shocks people when you tell them Matthew's an Old Testament book. What we're going to see here, Matthew chapter 17, verse 24, says, And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? Again, talking about, pay tribute, as we're seeing there in verse 6. Before this cause, pay ye tribute also. So that was something that was asked of him in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It says, doth not your master pay tribute? And it says, he said, yes. And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Peter saith unto him, Of strangers. Jesus saith unto him, Then are the children free. Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea and cast an hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt take a piece of money. That take and give unto them for me and thee. So you see that first part there, where he just tells them that the Lord knows where everything's at. So for him to tell Peter, go and fish, and first fish you catch is going to have the right amount of money in it. And the Lord he's God. He knows where everything is. He knows where everything's at. So that's a deity attribute right there. That's a deity verse there, showing that he could tell Peter to go fish, and the first fish he catches is going to have exactly the amount of money is needed to pay a tax. And if we go to Matthew chapter, it's going to be 22. Find that there. Yeah, Matthew 22, verse 15. You see it again. As far as paying tribute, the Lord paid tribute. It's interesting to see that the Lord would pay tribute to people that he created on the planet he created, money that he can make, and yet he pays tribute. So we see in Matthew 22, verse 15. And we get he says, Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. And they sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know that thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth, neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. So we're talking about tribute here. And he brought unto him a penny. And he saith unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? And they say unto him, Caesar's. Then he saith unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And when they had heard these things, they marveled and left him and went their way. So coming back to Romans chapter 14, you're seeing two examples where the Lord does pay tribute unto the rulers. These are the unsaved rulers, the rulers that should be paying tribute and homage and worship unto Jesus Christ. And yet he pays tribute unto them. So we see that there, and we see that in verse 6, going back to Romans chapter 14, verse 6. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. And they'll attend continually upon this, so they're going to want taxes, and so it's right to pay them. So we see that there. He says in verse 7, Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. So, and Paul mentions this here, talking about this. And he'll say, render therefore to all their dues, and he'll go on to mention this. And so he's mentioning this pretty much when it comes to the concept of, don't just blindly obey, but always make it a point to support godly government and rebuke that as well. Rebuke wickedness where you find it and obey godly government. Discern what times you're living in, and yet he says there, render therefore to all their dues. So you've got wickedness, and rebuke it. You've got godliness, and support it. And then he's saying that they render therefore to all their dues. Mentions that here. If we look at Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, Paul also goes on to the Ephesians about this. He'll kind of drive the point home a little bit better with them. And he'll say in Ephesians chapter 5, in verse 21, this is where this command comes from, where it says, and it goes on talking about the husbands and the wives and the children and so forth. But he does say in Ephesians 5:21, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. And where this comes from is where you're seeing in Romans chapter 13, verse 7, render therefore to all their dues. Tribute to whom tribute is due. This is how you can plug in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21 into Romans chapter 13, verse 7. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. So we see this plug in over here. And if we look also at 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 17, when Paul does give tribute to whom tribute is due, we find one such example in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 17. And it says, render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. You see a lot of honor being given, especially in this verse here. He says, now unto the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only wise God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. So Paul's giving honor to whom honor belongs in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 17. He does that quite a bit. He does it in Romans 11 when he's amazed at the wisdom and genius of God. He does it quite a bit in Ephesians. He does it here in 1 Timothy. But you're seeing that here. He's saying, now to the King eternal, immortal, and invisible, the only wise God. And so he's giving tribute to whom tribute is due. He's giving honor to whom honor is due. And that's just an example of what we're seeing here as he makes this known. And when it comes to, if you've got taxes, you give taxes to whom taxes are due. When it comes to the ruler of the land you're in, as Paul is writing this to the Romans. And so we discern the times by doing so. And so we see how this plugs in here. And so what he's essentially saying is be a productive, law-abiding citizen, is where this is all going. Is that Paul is telling the Romans it's right to be productive, it's right to be a law-abiding citizen in the land you're living in. Some people will say, well, I'm a Christian now, so I'm going to obey God and not the people around me, not the rulers, not the whatever. They're going to rebel and they're going to fight and they're going to tear everything down. And Paul's saying the opposite. Paul's saying it's right to be productive, it's right to be a law-abiding citizen of the productive land you're living in. So we're seeing the opposite there. So he says this in verse 7, we're in, and to render, therefore to all their dues, and give tribute, give custom, and give fear, and give honor, as needed, according to the structure. Going back to all the way to Romans 13:1 through where we are now, according to the structure, the order, and the concepts that God has set up. Discern who's in charge, but the structure and the order is meant to be there. So we see that there in verse 7. So, but there's also some other things. As we discussed this a little bit last week, there were times where Paul had to discern and use wisdom to make the situation right in order to keep pressing on. And we'll see, say, Acts chapter 14, verse 4. In Acts chapter 14, verse 4, one such situation that Paul had to think, how is he going to handle a situation? Because he would be put into some situations where he has to think. He has to think, how am I going to get around this or about this or through this? And we see in Acts chapter 14 in verse 4, it said that the multitude of the city was divided, and part in part held with the Jews, in part with the apostles. And when there was an assault made both of the Gentiles and also of the Jews with their rulers to use them despitefully and to stone them, they were aware of it and fled unto Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and unto the region that lieth round about. And there they preached the gospel. So if ever it came about where the rulers, as we see here, were used against them despitefully, and even to stone them, Paul said, I got to flee, I got to run. So instead of just standing there and blindly obeying everything, he says, well, in this case, I'm going to make a run for it. And so we see this in Acts chapter 14, verse 4. He made a run for it. And so we see this, this is what he did here. There's also other events we can see. If you look at all the way back, we'll take another Old Testament example, Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. Talking about free will, people had the choice to obey, disobey, otherwise. Exodus chapter 1, verse 22, so we get there ourselves. There's another example of people who were presented a law. They had to do something, and yet they chose to do otherwise. And history has been thankful ever since. Exodus chapter 1, verse 22 goes on, and here's what we read about what the law is there. Let me see here. Yeah. Goes on to say, and Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. And so it goes on through here, and then it goes on to see, we see in that's the last part of verse Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. That's the law. That's what's given out by the ruler. And Exodus 2, verse 1 talks about the house of Levi, and took a wife, daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. Didn't do what Exodus 1:22 said. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it by the flags by the river's brink. And his sisters stood afar off to wit what would be done. And we know it goes on from there. We know this is how Moses is sent down the river, and his life continues on from there. We're seeing that people wisely discerned what were they going to do about this, about a certain situation. And so we'll see that there. But it goes on, and you can also see the opposite, Acts chapter 25, verse 11. Not everyone's rebelling and running away and disobedient, and if they are, they're doing so for a reason. But Acts chapter 25, verse 11, Paul obeys and submits to the unsaved rulers around him, and he says so. He appeals. He says here in Acts chapter 25, verse 11, he says, for if I be an offender, this is Paul talking, if I be an offender, or have committed anything worthy of death, that's if he has been, he says that I refuse not to die, but if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal unto Caesar. So what he's saying is that he's going to appeal unto the ruler, the highest ruler at the time, which is going to be Caesar in Rome. And so Paul's saying, I'll obey what rules and regulations the land has set up for me, but I'm going to appeal unto Caesar if I be accused of being who I'm not, if I'm being called an offender, when all I'm trying to do is live my life and obey. So we can see where Paul obeys, we can see where Paul flees, we can see where Old Testament examples kick in, and even the Lord pays tribute, and we can see different people in different times do what needs to be done. So we see that there, and then we go back to Romans, and we're there in verse chapter 13, verse, I believe it's 8. We were in the 7 a minute ago. Romans chapter 13, we're going into verse 8. So it's honor to honor. Oh, no man anything, it says, but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. So as it goes through this, and then I'll just, I will stay here for a minute. He says, we're rendering everything in verse 7. Rendering, therefore, to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute, and custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear. Verse 8, owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. Now, one thing we remember is that Paul is writing to an audience that's greatly diverse. The audience in Rome is not only the body of Christ, mostly the body of Christ, primarily written for them, but based on what we remember reading from Romans chapter 9 and Romans chapter 10 and Romans chapter 2 and Romans chapter 11, and even a little bit of Romans chapter 7, is that there's also Jews in this audience. Paul's writing to Jews to edify them and build them up and give them knowledge of understanding and wisdom based on everything that's written in the book of Romans. Paul, we have to discern what Paul writes too, because once we rightly divide the word of truth and we get Paul, then we have to rightly divide Paul and understand that while Paul writes to the body of Christ, Paul also writes about Israel. Paul writes to Israel. Paul talks about Israel. And yet he can talk about Israel to the body of Christ. He can write to Israel explaining the body of Christ. He can write for Israel to the body of Christ. He can go back and forth, but he's explaining certain situations about the dispensation of grace and how Israel's not in the body of Christ, and how Israel doesn't make up the body of Christ, and how the body of Christ is not Israel. But there's certain issues where the context and the audience will come into play. And that's Romans 9, 10, 11, Romans chapter 2, Romans chapter 7. And so we see this here, even we're in Romans chapter 13, and we're seeing this in verse 8. Some of that audience is going to learn from what he's writing. He says, owe no man anything, based on what we've been seeing from Romans chapter 13, verse 7 and 8, but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. So Paul's not saying go back under those laws, those Old Testament laws, and don't go, or he's not saying go and obey 613 points of law and the law of Moses. He's not saying that. But he is letting them understand something familiar that they would know about as they come, whether they're reading this from a Jewish perspective, or even if they're part of the body of Christ that used to be Jewish, they and themselves. He's saying in verse 8, owe no man anything. And if we look at Ephesians 4:28, we'll see where this comes into play. While we're parked here for a minute, he says, owe no man anything. So in Ephesians 4, verse 28, this is how this is to kick in. As we go forth and we pay tribute and we render and we custom and we fear and we honor, we also owe no man anything. And this is one way we see this in Ephesians 4:28, where it says, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. So it's when you find someone who steals, whatever it may be, that's their mindset, that's their mentality, someone who makes their life all about cheating the system or beating the system or stealing or corruption. We see here, it says, let him that stole steal no more. You don't just stop there and write him off. You actually do something about it. And it says, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor. Let him work. Work is a good thing. Work is a right thing. Work is a great thing. People think that if they work too hard, it's going to kill them. And if they have a physical infirmity, that's a different story. But working is not a bad thing. Working is the right thing. Working is something that we can all do as we pay tribute, as we give custom, as we have fear, and as we give honor. Working is not a bad thing. So we see that in verse 28 of Ephesians 4. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needs. So what they're saying is the person who once was cheating the system or beating the system or had a corrupt mind or whatever, make it so that they work so hard that they're able to give to someone else now. That's the thought behind it. So see that in Ephesians 4:28. And as we plug that back in, that's where we see in Romans chapter 13, verse 8, owe no man anything. Make it so that someone else doesn't have to owe no man anything. Said in Romans 13, owe no man anything but to love one another. And so we see that there. Acquit yourself of all your obligations, except love. That's going to be one of the things. And, don't make it so that you can, get out of all your bills and everything without paying them. If you intentionally look forward to buying something and there's a bill that comes with it, there's a fee that comes with it, make sure you pay it. So we see that in verse 8. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. So as he goes forth to go forth and say this, he's still talking about in verse 8. He's talking about when he says fulfill the law, he's talking about the concept of owing someone, and he's still talking about government and rulers and everything else. So that subject matter still fits in the place, and he's saying that it hath fulfilled the law. So he mentions this here. We're not under it. We know that. And so we know by the law is the knowledge of sin, so that's why we wouldn't be under it. We're not going to put ourselves under that. But we do see something when it comes to government, nonetheless. We know that, and we'll get into that in just a minute, actually. I'm getting ahead of myself. But if you look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 10. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 10. And what we see here as this goes forth, as it talks about, how do you owe no man anything? How do you give tribute or custom? How are you going to go about working? We saw Ephesians 4:28 was one way. We're seeing another way here in 1 Thessalonians 4:10, where it says, and indeed ye do it toward all the brethren which are in all Macedonia. But we beseech you, brethren, that ye increase more and more, and that ye study to be quiet, and to do your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you, so that ye may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that ye may have lack of nothing. If you have lack of nothing, you can owe no man anything. If you have lack of nothing, because you're working for it. And so he goes on to say this here. You want to make sure that you're walking honestly and that you have lack of nothing. You have lack of nothing you're working for. You can pay for things. And again, by working for it. And so we see that in this verse here. If we look also in Colossians 3:14, a verse which we'll get to eventually as we do our verse by verse on Wednesdays. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 14. Goes on to say, and above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. So he's saying, as this plugs in, owe no man anything but to love one another. And we want to see that above all these things, put on charity. Charity is love in action. We see that from 1 Corinthians 13. We won't turn to it now, but a lot of the corrupt translations, they take 1 Corinthians 13 and they make that the love chapter. Actually, it's not the love chapter at all. It's the charity chapter. Charity is love in action. You can love a movie. You can love an animal. You can love a hamburger. You can love a whatever it is. You can love anything. But when you have charity towards something, you are now providing a charitable action, a loving action. You're doing something about the love that you have towards something or somebody. So it's not just loving. You can love. You love evil, you love wickedness. But when you're charitable towards the brethren, when you're charitable towards the Lord, when you're charitable towards the church, when you're charitable towards something, you're doing something, whatever it may be, to show that or to present something about that. So we see that in Colossians 3:14. Above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. So we see that there. And that's why we would see in verse 8, going back to Romans 13, owe no man anything but to love one another. See that therefore he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. So again, we're going to get into that because we didn't just break that down yet, but it's going to involve going into verse 9, which says, for this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Excuse me. Look at Galatians chapter 5 in verse 14. Galatians chapter 5, verse 14. Now, Galatians have this problem where they put themselves under the law. They allow Judaizers to do it. But Galatians 5, verse 14 goes on to say essentially the same thing. Written to them a little bit differently based on the issues that they were having. saying, for all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Went on to say, but if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed one of another. And then went on to say, this I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. And then it goes on from there. But what we're seeing as we go back to Romans 14, and we're in, where's it? Verse 8 is where it started out saying, he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. And so it's not about trying to obey all these commandments, because Paul's not endorsing trying to obey 613 points of law. He's not trying to put you under that law. But remember, the topic of this chapter is about governments. The topic of the chapter is about rulers and governments and how things work out for the believer in the dispensation of grace today, preaching Christ according to the revelation of the mystery. So what he's saying here, he starts out with that in verse 8, and he's saying, for this thou shalt not commit adultery. And as this plugs in, what he's essentially trying to say is that, the law of our land, or 613 points, so I'm supposed to teach you what's wrong. That's Romans 3. By the law is the knowledge of sin. So therefore, we can kind of flip it over a little bit and see also that which is right. And so we see that a government should, again, the word should, whether they do or whether not, it's up to the ruler that is in place based on the system of whether it's voting, whether it's whatever it is that the nation at the time is using. Verse 9 goes on to say, for this thou shalt not commit adultery. There should be something in place where, that's something that governments are helping to prevent. Thou shalt not kill. There should be laws in place where governments are preventing people from killing one another. Laws are in order so that this doesn't happen. And if you do, there's a price to pay for that. Thou shalt not steal. Government should have something in place where if you steal, there's a price to pay for it. So you don't do that. Thou shalt not bear false witness. That should be there as well. And thou shalt not covet. Like if you go into court, you're not going to just say anything you feel like. You're going to tell the truth in order for things to go right, in order for things to go along accordingly. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And so we see that there, essentially talking about that this is something that the government is supposed to deal with, these issues. So if somebody is, committing adultery or killing or stealing or committing false witness or coveting or so on and so forth, they're supposed to have laws and rules and governments and rulers that deal with these things. We kind of think how it's gone. Of course, they're the ones doing it now, but that's a part of the present evil world we're living in, and that's not God that did it. God set up the order so that these things wouldn't happen. Instead, it's the present evil world we're living in. So we see that here, and it says, according to the structure God left for us, the structure of thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. We see in Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. We see how it was left for us to be set up. Now things have moved along. As we said last week, I believe the phrase that we used was corrupt people ruling over corrupt people. That's how things are now. So as we see that there, government should operate by bowing to a higher power. That would be God's word rightly divided. And that, otherwise, if they're not bowing to this, the result is only going to be corruption. And that's what we have today. So as we continue on with this, we'll see in verse 9 that this is why things should be the way they are. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. As they love, you're not going to go out and commit adultery. You're not going to go out and kill. You're not going to go out and steal. You're not going to go out and bear false witness. Are you going to go out and you're going to go out and operate looking to love your neighbor? Which plugs into verse 10. Saying, love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. As we see this here, you're usually not going to get in trouble or arrested or in trouble with the authorities if you're looking to go forth and love your neighbor according to God's word rightly divided, or according to what's going on in the land there. Because it's not just to your friends or family or whatever, but to the ones, even the ones that are throwing away your gospel tracts, you're going to be looking to do them no harm. You're going to be looking to not cause them any trouble, even though they're the ones causing you trouble. as you're trying to get them saved, as you're trying to give them a gospel tract, as you're trying to present to them the gospel itself. You're going to try to do that. And this all goes back to not only here we are in Romans chapter 13, but if we go back one chapter to where we were, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, Romans chapter 12. And this is where we left off at the end of the chapter, verse 17. And this picks up again this lesson where we were picking up. Romans chapter 12, verse 17 says, recompense to no man evil for evil, provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. So we see that mentioned here. And so we see this plug into that part as well. And let's see, there's one more I wanted to mention here, if I can find it. If we look at Ephesians chapter 6, verse 9, when it talks about, we're talking about rulers, governing authorities, and how the believer has to walk in them, or should walk in them. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 9, when it talks about masters, rulers, in other words. And ye masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven. Neither is there respect of persons with him. So it's pretty much letting them know that whoever is the master or the ruler today of a nation or throne, dominion, principality, or power, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 9 says, knowing that you've got a master over you, and he's in heaven. And we know from Romans chapter 13, Romans chapter 12, that God's the avenger of all such. If you don't see justice in this world, there will be justice in the next. And so for whatever issue, whatever wrongdoing, whatever has happened, there will be justice in the next world, not in this one. So we see that take place here. But this is why Paul says this in Romans chapter 13 and verse 8, talking about he that loveth one another hath fulfilled the law. And for this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment that is briefly comprehended in the saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. This is what government should be doing, so that we're doing it as good citizens. To do otherwise is not going to work. So love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. We saw that in Galatians chapter 5 just a moment ago. If we look also at 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, I believe it is. 1 Timothy 1, verse 5. And we'll probably wrap up here. And it talks about that charity that we should have. He says, now the end of the commandment is charity out of a pure heart and of good conscience and of faith unfeigned. And so the end of the command, the point of why you're going to obey a commandment in the first place is going to be for charity out of a pure heart. So when it says thou shalt not kill, it's not going to be, oh, I hope I can obey this commandment and find righteousness in the law. And we're done with that today. We're in the dispensation of grace. The cross is where Jesus Christ and who crucified is our righteousness. It's not in the law. We're not going to go to it. We're not going to put ourselves under it. We're not going to put anybody else under it. But the whole point is that the end of the commandment is charity out of a pure heart. And so when you don't, when thou shalt not kill, you're doing it so that you have, there's going to be a point of charity from it. So that's just the example there. But we'll pretty much stop here, knowing that love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. And we'll open up to any kind of thoughts or questions based on what we just read from Romans chapter 13, verses 4 through 10. And then we'll continue next Sunday, probably wrapping up Romans 13 and getting into even Romans 14. So if there's any thoughts or questions on anything we just went through.
I had a bit of a thought just when we went back to Exodus, back at the start. Just the stark difference in the two dispensations. It's like, it's really, I mean, it really puts in perspective like what's being offered today, in this age. But then, kind of with that comes, with that liberty comes a bigger responsibility, really. A bigger, to whom much is given, much is required. I just had that thought when we went back, just to see the stark contrast between the two.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. Especially in the book of Numbers, a guy can get killed for just picking up sticks.
Yeah. Another thing as well, I can't remember, I think it might have actually been in Justin's lessons that I've just been recently in, but it talks about, he spoke about the giving of the law at Mount Sinai and how it thundered. And you see, and like it was like such a scary display, like terrifying display. And I think he kind of like tied it in with like contrasting, obviously, at least the sense that I was getting there is the contrast between, again, the grace that God's offering now, and obviously then was the law. And I think he also mentioned something about how, and this never really occurred to me until he actually mentioned it, but how Israel really should have known that they couldn't fulfill the law. They had the, I mean, really their response should have been, well, Abraham's already been given the promise. We'll just trust you by faith. We'll follow you by faith instead of saying, well, everything that the Lord says that we'll do, as commanded, we'll do. And then literally, probably as soon as he said that, 5 minutes later, somebody probably, you have the examples. It's, and then, another thing he mentioned as well, which, again, I never made a connection, which is amazing. In the wilderness, when they murmured, it was before, I think, am I right in the timings here? There was a moment, that's it. Yeah, so like, the part of the Red Sea and stuff, obviously you had the rock at Meribah, you had basically grace before the law. You had this example, and then, how then Israel murmured despite all of this. And then it kind of occurred to me, putting that together, Paul talks about how the law was added because of offenses. Mm-hmm. So those murmurings and things like that, it kind of, you see how like the timing and stuff of the scriptures and how just it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It all just fits together like this perfect picture.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, good insight to see that. Yeah. Anyone had other thoughts or anything? Any other questions or thoughts or? Loretta, did you have that question from earlier? We'll take the short answer if you want, or the long one, or the. No? Okay. Well, I guess we'll come back. We'll come back to that, I guess. But, anyone else have any thoughts on anything?
There was something else I wanted to ask. Just if anybody's had any experience, or trying to share the gospel with their family, because it's kind of, I'd appreciate any like input or anything, or any wisdom or anything from anyone previously, and how you sort of went about it, because I found it's quite difficult.
Yeah.
Basically, the only one that believes in my whole family, and sometimes trying to approach them.
Yeah.
Especially with my parents, my grandparents. Like, I mean, they raised me. And I'm to them, it's like their child's coming to them and basically saying, everything that you've ever thought is basically wrong. It's, how do you, I want to share the truth with them and then see them understand it, and then, let God basically lead them in understanding the scriptures. And it's difficult to approach the subject, I suppose.
I don't know if anyone else here has done that, but I've done that with both my parents. I've gotten the gospel to my grandparents and my wife, but not everyone believed it. I'd say 3 out of 5 did. So my dad, my mom, and my wife believed it. I don't know about my grandparents, but we've gotten the gospel to others. So we've gotten the gospel to my aunts and uncles and everyone else. Again, I don't know who's believed it and who hasn't. So, I can always guess, but my guess isn't truth.
I think the one thing is, with your parents and your grandparents, it's a little bit difficult because for their entire life, virtually, they've known something else, and we had the same situation. Andrea's or John's grandmother and grandfather lived with us for quite a long time. Well, about 10 years, 1-5 and 1-10. But there was great conflict in our home for a while because they understood one thing. We've tried to bring them to the knowledge of the truth. And I think because they were so ingrained in what they knew their entire life, they weren't willing to accept anything other than that. And it caused some real issues, and
tension.
Oh yeah, it caused tension because a lot of times, even around the holidays, they had their idea, we had our idea, and those two ideas conflicted with each other, and it brought some real tension. It brought some real problems, and we try to be understanding. We try to continue to talk to them about the gospel and so forth and so on. And a lot of times their response was, well, how can everybody else be wrong and you be right?
Yeah.
And that's tough. I mean, that's a tough thing to deal with, and especially like in Andrea's father's case. I mean, he was when he was Catholic and he was in the Holy Heart Society and all these other societies.
Knights of Columbus.
He was a Grand Knight and all these other things. So, maybe we were foolish even to think we were going to draw him away from that. But, at least we put the effort in to, give him the gospel. And once you do that, it's not your responsibility. They'll answer. I mean, they're going to be judged. Just like we're going to be judged. We're not going to be judged for our sin, but we will be judged for what we've done.
Yeah.
I think the old saying is true. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And and for me, I've not had that many experiences trying to spread the gospel to people because there's I do a little bit, but I'm just not fully 100% comfortable going into like all the Bible stuff with them. But even like with my husband, I mean, we talked about it. He went with me on my trip, but he just doesn't seem interested in anything, when it comes to that. So I just keep doing what I'm doing, and hopefully one day he'll want to join in, I can't make him. I can't. It's a very big point of stress in my life because I'm the only one that I know that rightly divides, and I have small children, so it worries me. Like, if I die, what's going to happen to my kids? You know, where are they going to go, and what are they going to see, and how are they going to make it if they don't know this? You know, because it took me 38 years to figure it out. 37, 38. So it's hard, but I guess you just got to keep plugging at it.
Yeah. I remember the first year. Obviously, I hadn't at this point. I didn't really know about like the right division. I just knew that, you know, that everything that I'd ever thought was true was wrong, and it was. And then to suddenly realize, then, you know, heaven is real, hell is real, the Bible is real, it's God's word. God is real. To suddenly go from that to then, and then, you know, once you've then settled the gospel in your own mind, again, like I say, I didn't understand the whole right division thing, and that really messed me up in terms of understanding the scriptures. Fast forward to now, thankfully, I'm kind of beginning to understand that. You know, once you've got it settled there, I couldn't help then start, you know, thinking about, well, what about my dad, my mum, my sister, my cousin, who was, you know, I've always seen my cousin as like a brother to us. I don't have a brother. Well, I do, him, but you know, it's just, but for years you've lived a certain way. They know you, you know, they know you as you've always been, and then to suddenly realize that actually, Justin, there was a video earlier on I was watching actually, and I think Justin actually raised this, talked about how everybody basically knows you, like your family and things like that, they know you as your old man. But now it's like you've got a new identity in Christ. You're essentially a completely new person, a new creature. Yeah. So like they only ever know you as what you were.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how do you know, it's difficult to try and communicate that. Yeah.
You're different.
Yeah, it is difficult. I mean, there's no question about it. I've tried. I have 3 other brothers beside myself, and they're all churchgoers. I mean, with the exception of my youngest one. But I've tried to explain it to my other brothers that are,
and your sisters,
and my sisters as well, and we continue to do that because, you know, like I said earlier, they just, you know, they've been indoctrinated into something that they're not going to, I just don't think they're going to change. I mean, we can give them the gospel, and we have, and I think sometimes we have to be satisfied with that. I'm not saying we should not continue to make the effort to get them to understand what we understand, and
in charity and grace.
In charity and grace.
With charity and grace, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of like come to the conclusion that the best thing I can really do is just keep studying, just keep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
keep getting the word in, keep letting it work effectually, keep believing, keep
absolutely.
Yeah, and then remember the conversations you have. You won't do it in one conversation. As far as winning your family over, so to speak. I guess bad way to say it, but. You know, getting them to trust the gospel, it's going to take multiple conversations over a multiple amount of time. So it's going to take time. You're going to have, out of maybe 100 conversations, you'll have to bow out of quite a lot of them as they start saying that they don't believe this and I don't believe that and I don't believe the Bible. You're just going to have to bow out gracefully and then wait for another time to talk to them in about 3 days or 5 days or a week. And then pick up where you left off and say, okay, you're not there. Let's talk about this instead. and it's just going to be hit and miss and talk about this, and mainly ask them questions. I mean, you won't be the one who's going to, start throwing things at them as much as ask them, what do you guys think about creation? What do you think about God? What do you think about this verse versus that verse? Let them tell you what they think. That way you can start working on where they're at.
Yeah.
And it'll take, and you'll hear the confusion coming from them, because they'll say, well, I think that I should do this and not that, and I think you're wrong because of this, and I think the Bible's not right because of that. But you're hearing their thoughts, you're hearing what they think, you're hearing where their heart's at, and at least you're getting a feeling for where they're at.
Yeah.
So it'll take a while, it'll take a lot of conversations, and there'll be a lot of frustration in the meantime, but then when it pays off, they'll be real thankful.
And the more you study, the more you will know what verses and so on to present to them that would make them think more about what you're saying. That's the whole key. Once you get them thinking.
The problem is sometimes, and I have this problem too, is that when somebody says something, I have 20 verses ready to go, and they can't handle one.
Well, again, charity, wisdom, discernment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I have noticed like I kind of got like sucked into like in the first year I kind of got sucked into the whole apologetics, and there's so many, looking back on it now, it's like, you've got this whole logical argument, and you can go down the line of, but then really, I mean, it had nothing to do with any of that made me believe. It was just hearing the word of God. It was just hearing the scriptures, and it talks about it only really works effectually if you believe. So you have to start from literally the point of faith. So, you can.
Yeah, they have
I don't know.
to
It's like somewhere you have to. It's like trying to find. You can only go so far, with certain lines of reason from what I've seen. Like, eventually there has to be that point where you believe the word, and then it's like from that moment they hear the gospel, you believe. God's word says they're sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise, and faith has a mustard seed.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have tried sharing, like, in the past. So, well, I suppose every family situation is sort of like different in relationships and things, but I've kind of like got quite a big family. It's really sort of broken up, an extended family. My parents aren't together. They haven't been for quite a while, but I did try and, I mentioned before about how the theology that I was kind of getting involved in, or the thinking, like, it really, really messed up the way I was thinking. Like, I was really into the whole prophetic aspect at the time. Got really caught up in prophecy this, prophecy that, or COVID, the sign of the end, and COVID just came along and that just kicked it into sixth gear basically, and it was like basically all coming to a head. I felt like a pressure cooker. It was like I had to say something to get across I was almost convinced that any day, the rapture's going to occur, and any day, and it wasn't good. Like, my thinking then, it really wasn't good. And I think what I've basically done is, unfortunately, I've not presented a good witness. If you know what I mean. Because I shared it with my dad, and he probably just thought I was crazy, to be honest. So now I've got a bit of an uphill battle there. When it comes to that.
Well, you'll get there. Like you said, just study up on the material, load up on Bible studies and the Bible itself, and let it change you. Let it work in you, and you'll start seeing things differently. You'll start understanding things a little, even better than what you do now, which is great. And that goes for all of us. The more we study, the more we're going to understand things better and better and better. It's just that's everybody. It's all of us.
And the more you speak to people, the more you understand how to present or how to go from plan A to plan B, or.
Yeah.
But like John always says, the first and foremost is get them the gospel. And if you can just pick out some verses like in Ephesians, and what's Ephesians 1:14? Is it
1:13?
13. Yeah, Ephesians 1:13, the gospel of your salvation, and go from there to Galatians 1, which explains there's no other gospel but that one today. So, and then go on to 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4. I mean, it can't get much clearer than that.
Yeah.
Well,
as long as they're open to it.
It's clear to us, but
it is clear to us, yeah. But that gives you, like you said, get into conversation with people, because if you're asking people today, what is the gospel? And they're telling you something other than what you know to be, you've got a starting point.
Yeah, and that's because people will try to argue with you about water baptism, and Apostle Paul's not your pattern, and the Bible's not really this Bible, but it's that Bible, and I go to this church, and so you're arguing for 2 hours about something that's not even important.
Yeah.
And if you win the argument about the right church or the wrong Bible or the wrong apostle, and you never get to them the gospel in the first place, then they still drop into hell, even if you win the argument.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no point. Yeah. I've come across quite a lot as well, especially online. There's so many. It's quite. Well, I suppose it shouldn't really be shocking, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I've come across a lot of people saying that on forums and stuff, like, is the apostle is Paul's epistles even scripture and things like this? And it's just like it's well, like I say, it is shocking, but it isn't. You know, it's kind of to be expected, really, because it's in Paul's epistles they actually find the gospel of our salvation. So, you know, what's the the perfect? I mean, the perfect strategy of the enemy would be to
they find that
obfuscate it.
Paul's 13 epistles don't match up with the rest of prophecy in the Bible, so they think it's like a pop quiz. And are you going to make sure that you rip out those 13 epistles and let the rest of the Bible be the rest of the Bible? Of course, that's not the answer, but that's what they're starting to do. Is they're starting to call Paul the heretic. And
I've noticed it seems to be increasing as well. I'm just seeing it a lot more. I mean, maybe I'm seeing it now because obviously I'm so emphasized and focused at the moment on Paul's epistles and reading them. So maybe that's why I'm seeing it. But
But what we'll do is get close to 2 o'clock on our end, and we'll start wrapping up here. We'll be back here Wednesday, 6:45 for the book of Colossians, and we'll be back here next week as well. But like we say every week, the chat room is open 24 hours a day, so you can talk anytime about any Bible question or anything. We're all on that same chat room, so you can talk anytime or talk anytime, and we'll be there. So.
Thank you for that. It helps. Just hearing your guys' experiences and stuff. That would help.
And then I wanted to circle back to Loretta. I didn't know if you wanted to ask that question that you had earlier. The one with the short answer, the long answer.
My phone is almost dead now, so.
Oh, okay.
I'll come on the chat later. I want to study it a little bit more, my question, before I ask.
Okay. All right, no problem. All right, so
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then one other question we had was, we're just kind of curious, Liam, about your geographical location. What's the closest airport to where you are?
I think that would be Newcastle Airport.
Newcastle Airport.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Yeah. So I think someone was just curious about that.
Is it an international airport?
Is that an international airport?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest ones, just behind Heathrow, I think.
Heathrow, okay.
So let's see, Newcastle Airport. Yeah, one of the bigger airports. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I think it is international. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, so we'll be back here Wednesday. We'll be back here again Sunday, and the chat room's open for everybody all the time. So, all right, we'll see everyone later, and we'll meet up again.
Grace and peace, everybody.
All right, thank you, everyone. See you later. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.